The IDF have just released footage which shows a massive tunnel that they've uncovered, one of the biggest yet, near the Erez crossing, which is a crossing between Israel and Gaza. They've actually said that they've been in there for a few weeks now, trying to make it safe and see what's in there. From the pictures, these ones you can see are actually the tunnel workshop where they worked on digging and creating the parts. Big enough, you see there, to fit that massive truck down there. Yeah. This, of course, the Erez crossing, for those who don't know, is quite an important place because until October the 7th, it's where all sorts of goods and people crossed over between Israel and Gaza. So that included more than 800,000 Gazans who crossed in 2022 into Israel, more than 550,000 who crossed over in the first half of 2023, and had things carried on like normal, those numbers would have come close to 1 million. So this idea that Gaza was totally closed off to Israel before the massacres of the 7th of October is actually fallacious, and in reality there was the beginnings, let's say, or maybe not so much the beginnings of people being able to go across. For example, 18,500 Gazan workers used to cross into Israel in order to work there with work permits. And because the average pay in Israel is 6 times higher than in Gaza, that meant that they took money home to stimulate the economy in Gaza. So all of these things that you might have assumed were good for the Gazan economy, Gazan life, were actually ultimately scuppered by what Hamas did. And you can just see this is how they dug those tunnels. This is footage that they recovered from the actual Hamas cameras and Hamas files of them digging that massive tunnel at the Erez crossing. They say it didn't cross under the border into Israel, but it came right up to it, something like 4 kilometres of tunnels. So it's a mixture of footage that they've revealed of them trying to make it safe, and also footage they've managed to acquire of Hamas building the tunnels in the first place, using all that aid money that Britain and other countries have poured into the Palestinians' coffers, only for it to be hijacked for this sort of thing, and for their leaders to end up becoming billionaires, and many of them basing themselves now in Qatar.
And it's calculated that there are 500 kilometres or miles, which one is it, of tunnels underneath Gaza, and it is a huge, perhaps almost impossible job to annihilate all of them. What is the solution to this subterranean part of Gaza?
I think the solution is, sadly, what we're seeing Israel having to do, which is really, really difficult fighting and hand-to-hand combat sometimes, house to house, going under these houses, into these tunnels, where there are often ambushes. There are often terrorists who base themselves inside there, waiting
Who will know those tunnels better than the IDF?
So they're working on a mixture of intelligence that they've got from various sources, including the many terrorists that they did arrest, both on the 7th of October and since then, in the engagements in the Gaza Strip. Those people are giving them information that's helping them to work out how to act. They're going into the tunnels, they're really taking the fight directly there, and of course airstrikes as well, but they can't just bomb the whole place from the air to get rid of the tunnels, because as we said, they're very often built underneath hospitals, schools, mosques. We've heard domestic homes, all sorts of civilian facilities which really should be out of bounds are now covering over these tunnels. Also, there's the possibility that some of the hostages are still inside those tunnels, and that's a terrifying idea, not just for the hostages, but also it means that to try and take them out, there is the risk of killing the hostages themselves. It's worth also just noting at this point that the UN tweeted just the other day that they condemned one of the Israeli methods of trying to get rid of the tunnels, which is they had been looking at flooding them with seawater. They'd installed pumps, and they have tested doing that. I think they started doing that to some of them. The UN said that this wasn't a good idea. It could cause difficulties in Gaza and problems. The problem here is, I think, that we see that institutions like the UN are willing to criticise what Israel's doing because it's very difficult and it involves balancing very hard decisions, but they don't really seem to have any ideas of how to deal with it. They certainly didn't do anything to stop UN money being funnelled into building these tunnels. Just think about the amount of concrete, the millions and millions of dollars that it will have taken to dig them, to build them, to reinforce them. They've got blast doors, they've got toilet facilities, bathrooms, sometimes kitchens, I believe, weapons storage. All of it is what you can see from this shot. It's an IDF drone, which is actually showing the soldiers as they're looking into the mine shaft that goes into the tunnel, goes all the way down into there and up to the Erez crossing. And I think it's just tragic to know that all of this is underneath the homes of ordinary citizens in Gaza. And here, in this example, it's there to sabotage the very crossing that was meant to provide humanitarian and financial aid to Gazans.
That is the blow, isn't it? And that will resonate through Israeli society, that the very function of the Erez crossing, which was to attempt to produce something neoliberal in the Gazan economy, to encourage 18,500 Gazans to come into Israel and earn multiples of what they could do at home, being used like this. How do you think that will embolden Israeli public opinion about the war itself, the prosecution of the war, and indeed the rest of the world, who still calls for humanitarian pauses and, of course, in some extreme cases, for ceasefires?
Well, this tunnel in particular goes up to 50 metres below the ground. It's quite a feat of engineering. And I do think that, particularly because of its placement there at the Erez crossing, it is very depressing, even for those who were believing that there was some kind of coexistence that could take place between the Palestinians in Gaza and the Israelis, because all of that coexistence was stopped because of what happened on the 7th of October and this tunnel. I mean, it's also worth watching, as there's a bit of footage of the actual crossing point, how it was before October the 7th and how it is afterwards, because they particularly focused on it on that day as well. During the massacres, they completely trashed it. Before then, again, it would be a surprise to many British news consumers that it was more or less like an airport. The footage, it looks like a regular kind of airport. There's X-ray machines, there's sort of entrance gates, but it was a very civilised-looking place. You could see in the footage Palestinians speaking with the Israelis who were there, the military personnel who overlooked and oversaw the facility. And I think that it's remarkable that all that was going on almost under the radar, even though it's in full sight. Those people were often crossing into Israel, not just for work, by the way, but also for medical care. Tons of Palestinians, thousands of Palestinians entered Israel to receive medical treatment. Over 7,000 Gazans entered Israel in 2022 to receive medical treatment. And I mean that had to stop as well. And you can see now what the problem is. There'll be a huge portion of Israeli society that will always be nervous, to say the least. They won't trust people coming over when, in actual fact, some of the people that were taken hostage on that day were volunteers who used to drive those Palestinians who came over at the crossings to the hospitals for treatment. One such man who had treatment in an Israeli hospital, of course, was Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in Gaza. He wasn't taken over as a humanitarian case. He was actually in prison in Israel on 3 life sentences for killing Israelis and Palestinians who he thought had collaborated with Israel. He, for example, killed one man by accident during an interrogation. He was known to be quite a brutal man, still is. He received medical care in Israel for a brain tumour. Despite all that, and despite being exchanged for Gilad Shalit, the soldier who was taken hostage, he was part of that exchange deal. Over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners were given back in return for the one soldier. He then went and set up the Hamas that we know now and is the architect of the October the 7th massacres and the war that's taken place now. So this man, who received medical treatment in Israel, is also responsible for this exact tunnel we've just seen uncovered by the IDF and for this very war, which is seeing life for Gazans just absolutely destroyed.